Welcome, everyone. We're just getting started here. This is a Q&A session. So if you have any burning questions about what happens in schools, especially about what happens with school discipline, why it is that maybe it looks like nothing's being done sometimes, what kinds of things are being done, how do we determine consequences? What's it all based on? Whatever it is you might be curious about there having to do with school discipline, please go ahead and jump on and share your questions in the chat. Speaking of which, I'm just working on getting my chat box open. There we go. Sounds like getting started music, doesn't it? By the way, I need someone to tell me if the music is too loud. Let's see if I can take a look here. Another method. One of the things I'm learning to do with my streaming here is, instead of using headphones for my monitor, I'm using smart glasses that give me some speakers there so I can hear what's going on without it interfering with the mic. Glasses that give me some speakers there so I can hear what's going on. There we go. And I wonder, that should also let me switch over. Now we're going to see what things sound like on the other pair. So the big question is, if we're playing the music, is the music too loud? Oh, that doesn't sound too loud. And I don't think I'm seeing any questions in the chat yet. Let's see, am I missing it? Nope. Yeah, so feel free to jump in there. All right. So we're on. What I'm going to do is, until we get any questions in the chat here, I'm just going to start talking about a few different things related to California Education Code. And I want to start with the caveat that I am not an attorney and this is not legal advice. So California Education Code is where we find the rules for whether or not students can be suspended, or if we're required to suspend them, or if they can be recommended for expulsion, or if we're required to expel them. All that is codified in two places mainly, in section 48900 and section 48915. So right now, like the one I have up on the screen here is 48900. And you can see there, a pupil shall not be suspended from school or recommended for expulsion unless the superintendent of the school or the principal of the school in which the pupil is enrolled determines that the pupil has committed an act as defined pursuant to any of subdivisions A through R inclusive. And then we get into it. And so you can see, like right here at the top, one of the number one things, major safety problem. If a student is causing, attempting to cause, or threatening to cause physical injury to someone, they can be suspended. Now, what I've seen is that I think it is a best practice that many school districts have created their own discipline guides for use across all of their school sites that give school administrators what really amounts to something similar to sentencing guidelines, where it will kind of give you a range saying on the first offense, this is what we do. On a second offense, this is what we do. On a third offense, this is what we do. Now, in most cases, those discipline guides will also leave exceptions, because if there's something that's particularly egregious, if it's more severe, then it's not going to matter that it's a first incident. And there are also different pieces of California Education Code, or different subdivisions that get triggered in those cases. Usually, most school fights that are dealt with involve these two. Now, this is one of the things that I think it's interesting, because you do find that there are some school administrators who have different takes on this. To me, those subdivisions A1 and A2 are both serve a purpose. They're both very important. And of course, the one that I'm often talking with students and families about is that self-defense piece. That right to self-defense is not absolute. And most importantly, what I want to point out is that, yes, due to self-defense, you might be defending yourself. So that might mean that you did not violate subdivision A2. But if you caused injury, if you attempted to cause injury, or you threatened to cause injury, well, then you're still responsible for A1, and you can still be suspended. And even this, when you're talking about self-defense, I like to describe self-defense in this way. In the school setting, self-defense is doing what it takes to get out of the situation, and no more. So yes, we recognize that may require you to get physical. You might have to push someone. If you're cornered, your back's up against a wall, you might have to kick them, you might have to punch them. But if you do so in a way that you are trying to cause injury, that you do cause injury, if you threaten to cause injury while you're doing it, any of those, well, then it's not so great. We might still be able to say that it was self-defense and you didn't violate A2, but you might still have violated A1. And then more significantly is that when you go to 48915, Ed Code 48915 talks about causing serious physical injury. And so if you cause someone serious physical injury, well, then we're looking at a possible recommendation for expulsion. So these are just a few of the things that we find ourselves addressing when we're dealing with school fights. Another one that I want to point out that's rare, but it does come into play sometimes, is, I believe it's subdivision T. There we go. So subdivision T. There we go. A pupil who aids or abets the infliction or attempted infliction of physical injury to another person may be subject to suspension, but not expulsion, pursuant to this section, except that a pupil who has been adjudged by a juvenile court to have committed as an aider and abetter a crime of physical violence in which the victim suffered great bodily injury or seriously injury shall be subject to discipline pursuant to subdivision A. So, note the reference to penal code. Aids or abets as defined in section 31 of the penal code. I'll say again, I'm not an attorney, this is not legal advice. I'm a school administrator. But let's take a look. California Penal Code 31 defines aiding and abetting as helping someone commit a crime, even if the person doesn't directly participate in the crime. Now, let me say this. I do strongly believe that section, the subdivision T for aiding and abetting is underused. I think there are actually more fight situations where it needs to be used, because I think that there is room for discussion about those who are cheering on the fight, those who are encouraging the fight, those who are talking up the fight, that they are aiding and abetting. Notice it says specifically this includes encouraging, facilitating, or advising someone to commit a crime or act as a lookout. I think if you talk to most school administrators who deal with a lot of discipline, you're going to find that they are extremely familiar with section 48900, A1, A2. They're probably familiar with paragraph K, disrupted school activities, or otherwise willfully defied the valid authority of school staff, of supervisors, teachers, administrators, school officials, or other school personnel engaged in the performance of their duties. They might be familiar with a few others, like paragraph C. Or I should say subdivision C. Unlawfully used, possessed, sold, or otherwise furnished, or been under the influence of a controlled substance. That's not the one I want. That's the one I want. So yeah, with vaping being as prevalent as it is, we still see a little bit of old school weed, papers, lighters, but more so it's vaping. And vaping, I'd say the numbers, it often looks like about 50-50, like it's part nicotine and it's part THC. We see both. And it's terribly concerning that as addictive as nicotine is, that we've got so many kids who are vaping it. So what are your questions? What do you want to know about school discipline, about the difference between suspension and expulsion? Who makes these decisions? How do they make these decisions? How are investigations conducted? What can I tell you? And while I can speak from a perspective where I'm very familiar with California Education Code, I'm happy to look up whatever the guiding laws and policies are in the region that you live in, and we can look at them together and see what we make of them. Yep, I still don't see any questions in the chat. Has anyone got anything for me? Or are you an educator yourself? Are you an educator who wonders why it doesn't seem that anything's done when you send that student up to the office on a referral? What's happening behind the scenes? Is anything happening? know too that I can't speak to, of course, to every situation because administrators are different. Some people have different practices. Some school districts have different practices. Some school sites have different practices. So it is varied. But one thing I can definitely talk about is I can talk about what is generally known as best practice. So what have you got? I also want you to know, or want you to chime in and tell me, what do you think makes the best background for me here? Do you like my retro 60s vibe office here? By the way, this is from Mad Men. Or do you prefer stuff that's a little more modern, like this? I'm curious to know. Or this. Here, I can go right down the list and show you. Look at that flag waving in the distance and everything. You would think I was there. I see that we're struggling to get viewers right now. So will we get more if we have the White House in the background? It looks like I'm out here in front. Look, you can even see the fountains there. So still looking for your questions about school discipline. That's what I'm here for today, is to answer questions about school discipline. So I'm here to answer questions about school discipline. What have you got for me? Have you ever had a child suspended? Have you ever had a child recommended for expulsion? Have you ever been a school employee, a teacher in a classroom or otherwise, who had a student that you thought should be suspended who wasn't? What kind of lingering questions do you have? Yeah, I do really like this background, but I don't think it's probably the ideal one for the topic. I think the bottom line is I need some more backgrounds. I do. I always like this one just because it's different, but that isn't really conducive to our question board there. Let's see if we can fix that. There we go. While I'm waiting for some more questions, switch glasses here because these are more on a delay because I'm going to hear the audio from the actual live stream itself. Yep, there it is. All right, and so I'm back. We are still answering questions about school discipline. You can feel free to jump in anytime. Get our jazz going again here a little bit. So much of the discussion around school discipline, again, relates to California Education Code. Again, for the record, I'm a school administrator. I am not an attorney, and this is not legal advice. But if you have questions about how to navigate the school discipline that your child is facing, how to support them through it, or how to help them stay out of the trouble that could land them in a situation where they're facing school discipline, these are questions I can help you with. So while we're sitting here waiting for some questions, I'm also going to pull up the other part of Ed Code. So we've been looking at section 48900. We're going to try taking a look at 48915. There we go. So 48915, the difference is that this addresses things that can result in recommendation for expulsion. Notice, shall recommend the expulsion of a pupil for any of the following acts committed at school or at a school activity. Now, I can highlight for you real quick the ones that come up most often. Things that most often result in a recommendation for expulsion. Right there. There's the first one. Causing serious physical injury. So it's a little loosely defined as far as what serious physical injury is, but what is generally viewed as serious physical injury might be a documented concussion, broken bones, contusions, abrasions, lacerations, that especially those requiring stitches or something. Pretty much anything that requires you to need treatment that's more than Band-Aids and ice in an emergency room, we would likely consider those to be serious physical injury. Now, the thing about that is it's kind of like things are in a court. We can't take any action without having conducted an investigation and having evidence. So in the case of serious physical injury, the evidence that is required is that medical documentation. You know, we don't see recommendations for expulsion for knives as much as we used to. Seems to me like that used to be a much more common thing. Now, there are some details about that, about how big the knife would have to be for it to be a mandatory recommendation for expulsion, but that can vary by school district too. So I've heard different things at different times. In some cases I've heard doesn't matter the length of the blade, a blade of any length must go to a recommendation. I've also heard the 3.5 inch rule, so that any blade longer than 3.5 inches, that's where you've got a mandatory recommendation for a blade. All right, controlled substances. Yeah, no, not so much. The ones I've had that have gone to a recommendation for expulsion are ones that involve sales of controlled substances or extremely serious controlled substances, like when you're starting to deal with stuff like Xanax or thank goodness I haven't seen any fentanyl on campus yet that I know of, but when we're dealing with something that is really, really dangerous, that's when we might more be at a recommendation level for there. I've seen a few of these, not a lot though. This is the basis for many of our recommendations for expulsion, and I think members of the public might be surprised these days at how frequent it is that we have staff who are in some way hit, pushed, shoved, knocked down, injured, or potentially injured by students. This also happens a lot in special education classrooms. One of the important responsibilities that school administrators have is to find that balance where all students are held accountable if they're causing injury to people. In some cases, a student's behavior that causes injury to people might be a manifestation of their physical disability. I shouldn't say physical, of their disability, of their particular diagnosed issues. The thing is if the behavior is a manifestation of that disability, and therefore we can expect that it's going to continue happening, and it isn't their fault, it isn't their choice, well, then the general public school setting might not be the right placement for them. They might require a more restrictive environment if they are hurting people and they can't help it as a manifestation of their disability. Anyway, so a lot of them, our recommendations for expulsion are based on that assault or battery on a school employee. Again, school administrator here, not an attorney. This is not legal advice, but I always like to cover for everyone because I always found it confusing, the terminology confusing, going from the vernacular to the legal language. Assault or battery. So just keep in mind, battery, that's the actual hands-on hitting, punching, kicking, pushing, shoving. Assault can be the threatening language, can be the threatening body language, can be moving towards someone as though you are about to hurt them. It can be telling them that you're going to hurt them. It can be any of your behavior that puts them in fear of their physical safety. Now, you will see in a lot of the language discussion of other means of correction. What that other means of correction is about is that suspension and expulsion should never be our first automatic go-to. We need to, number one, fully understand the situation, fully understand what education codes were violated, and then from there we need to look at the student's discipline history. Is this a pattern? Is this ongoing? Have other things been done in the past? Have other means of correction already been tried? Have we already tried counseling and coaching this student? Has the student signed a no contact agreement with someone else? Have they been involved in a mediation? Those are all examples of other means of correction. Other means of correction also might include things like detention, in-school suspension, even guardian contact. Parent-guardian contact is an other means of correction because in many cases, of course, when parents learn of what's going on, there are going to be consequences at home. And so parents are often in a more effective position than school staff are to be able to enforce meaningful consequences that have an impact on the student's outlook on things. But I also want to say too that consequences, in my experience, consequences tend not to be the things that most change behavior. The things that most change behavior, in my view, really are more of the coaching. I try to invest a lot of my time in helping students understand how to stay out of trouble. I'd so much rather invest my time there than invest my time in sending them home on suspension. If I have a student who's done something, who's made a decision, who's engaged in a behavior that is resulting in them being suspended or recommended for expulsion, I can't help but feel like I have failed at my job. Okay, so we're still going through the list here of things that you can be recommended for expulsion for. So, of course, possessing, selling, or otherwise furnishing a firearm. Now, this also addresses, if we were to go back to section 48900, you're going to see in section 48900, paragraph M, possessed an imitation firearm. Means a replica of a firearm that is so substantially similar in physical properties to an existing firearm as to lead a reasonable person to conclude that the replica is a firearm. So yeah, it becomes, toy guns are never okay on campus, but it becomes an especially serious problem if a student has a toy gun, an airsoft gun, splat gun, a BB gun that looks like a real firearm. In those cases, that triggers subdivision M, which is about possessing an imitation firearm on school grounds. One of the reasons that it's so incredibly serious, other than the fact that it just completely disrupts school activities, the moment something like that is seen and, we are locking down a school, calling in law enforcement, searching students, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. But what I want students to understand too is that when law enforcement is addressing things like that, having that replica and pulling that out and having it in your hands in the presence of law enforcement puts your life at risk. So I really, that's something that I really need students to understand. So paragraph N addresses SA. Paragraph, I'm sorry. No, we're still in, this is back to 48900. So these are the things you can be suspended for. Subdivision O is something I talk to students a lot, because there is still very much a snitches get stitches mindset out there. And we do often have situations where once a fight happens or a fight's going to happen and we start getting statements from students and we're investigating the situation, we start having problems with students harassing, threatening, or intimidating one another. And we do suspend for that. If we have evidence, such as a text message that says, "You're a snitch," that student who sent that text message is going home on suspension. I don't know how many days. I'd have to see the discipline history. I have to see what they've been involved in before, but that is in no way okay. This one, boy, I don't know when this was a problem, but the fact that it gets its own subdivision, can anyone tell me that? Let's ask ChatGPT. I think we need an answer to this. Why was this included in... Here, let me give you a screen you can see. So what this tells us, Soma, which was a brand name for the muscle relaxant carisoprodol, has been identified as a substance that can be abused. Sedative effects, relaxing and intoxicating. When mixed with other substances like alcohol, its effects can be enhanced, leading to dangerous situations. Okay, but this is my question. When was Soma an issue? Late 1990s and early 2000s. Okay. Well, once again, I'm reminded that we live in an incredible time now when all the information is at our fingertips, even more so than it has been all these years that we've had Google to be able to search things. The fact that we can ask ChatGPT to explain things to us now, and we can have it explain things to us as though we're a child. This is our royalty-free music that we've got going on right now. Keep our ChatGPT window open for us. Still watching for questions in the chat. Had someone had a guest on my multi-guest on my TikTok live the other day, and totally got my ego stroked multiple times in the conversation as the guest kept referring to my show. Just to be clear, I am not anybody. I'm just a guy with a job who likes to get in front of the camera and live stream and play around making TikTok videos and post a few things to YouTube. So, but it was fun. It was fun to have it referred to as a show. So. I'm going to step away from the microphone for just a minute. All right, so I don't need to BRB anymore. I am back. And again, I am looking for your questions about schools, about school discipline, about suspension, expulsion, about school fights. Any of that you want to get into, I am prepared for. We could also even talk a little bit about teaching, instruction, educational philosophy. I'm pretty much down for any of that. So feel free to jump on here with me. Put your questions in the chat. As always, please do like, share, subscribe. All of that is greatly appreciated. I had another guest on my TikTok live yesterday who was dealing with a situation where they were being called to HR. So teacher being called to HR after an incident where a non-compliant, disrespectful student, after failing to follow repeated instructions and mocking and laughing at the teacher, the teacher got exasperated and raised her voice as she asked, why would you do that to me? But she said it loud and ended up with a complaint. And, you know, my main message to her is that just because you're being called in to speak about something doesn't mean that you're being fired. In fact, it's rare that someone's fired for a momentary lapse in judgment, something that they can reflect on, see how they could have done better, take responsibility for, improve. It's the types of things that someone might be fired for on a one-off are generally the types of things that you've got bigger worries, like you're worried about criminal charges or losing your credential or something like that. So, you know, just understand that school administrators have a responsibility to investigate things when something is reported, when a complaint is made. It doesn't necessarily mean that anyone's trying to fire you. Now, I would say, on the other hand, if you are facing just a never-ending stream of write-ups, might be time to read the writing on the wall. I know what I need to use the applause button for. I do have an applause button. See right here. We need an applause button for when somebody actually posts a question in the chat. By the way, some other just side notes. Some of you may have seen my video about smart glasses. So, you know, I recently purchased Ray-Ban Meta glasses, and I love them. They life-changing. I don't love that I can't stream to TikTok with them. I can stream to Instagram with them. Of course, we know that's by design. They're Meta glasses. But they're a quality product. They're really, really great. Now, the glasses I'm wearing right now, I shared in this video the other day that you may or may not have seen. These are also smart glasses, but these are cheap smart glasses. Like the song Cheap Sunglasses. Okay, these cheap smart glasses, of course, they don't have AI in them like the Meta glasses do. They also don't have an integrated camera. They do still have audio. They still do have hands-free calling. And this is one of the things I'm finding I really love the smart glasses for, is for streaming. Because you don't want the audio from your computer, like the music I'm playing right now, to feed back into your mic. And with glasses like these, you can hear it without having a headset on. That's why you see so many podcasters who are wearing headsets while they broadcast. It's to separate and keep that. They also may be monitoring their own mic sound in those headphones. But doing it this way, I feel like I'm still connected to the real world, and I can still hear what I'm putting out there as far as sound effects, like that. Sorry, it just makes me want to dance. So yeah, the glasses really, to me, are life-changing. All right, still looking for questions in the chat. Still don't see anybody coming on here lately, so maybe we'll wrap this up and let this one just sit in the leave it active in the live stream videos that are still up. We have addressed some important pieces of California Education Code today. Namely, we took a look at Section 48900 and Section 48915. Let's zoom that in a little bit for you. So we looked at Section 48900, describing what someone can be suspended for. We looked at 48915, describing what someone can be recommended or shall be recommended for expulsion for. And we talked a little bit about, especially in 48900, some of the most common education code violations that result in suspension. So we've got A1, caused, attempted to cause, or threatened to cause physical injury to another person. We've got A2, willfully used force or violence upon the person of another, except in self-defense. Yeah, we didn't talk much about subsection B, dangerous objects, firearms, knives, explosives, etc. C is fairly common too, but as schools have been working more and more to use other means of correction, I would say that C is less often a basis for suspension, because if we can keep a student in school, if they're not a danger to others, if they're not a danger to themselves or others, and we can keep them engaged in school and stop the behavior or the problem from continuing for the time being, well, then we'd rather do that. They're not doing any good at home. I mean, I don't think there are any of us who think that for most students who tend to break the rules, suspension can seem like just a vacation from school, and they're happy to have it. So we also talked about from Section 48915 the things that can most often, or that in my experience I most often see as the reason that someone gets a recommendation for expulsion. So serious physical injury, not so much knives anymore, not so much substances, not even, we don't see a lot of robbery or extortion. I have seen a few, but this one, probably the single most frequent recommendation for expulsion is that. And it can happen when staff are breaking up a fight and students start punching, kicking, shoving staff. That's common. It happens often in situations where we have staff in special education classrooms and it's often the case that it's a function of a manifestation of the student's disability that is, if not a direct causal factor to the behavior, a contributing factor. And so in all those cases, we may start the process of a recommendation for expulsion, but then ultimately it gets stopped when it gets determined that, no, this is a manifestation of their disability. The thing is that then it leads to a discussion about whether or not their placement is the right place for them. Because we cannot just give students a free pass to injure others or assault others. So that's kind of what we covered today. Appreciate those of you who did join. Always appreciate the questions. I really am hoping to do a lot more of this. So if you find this kind of stuff useful, please let me know. This video is going to be up. Please feel free to comment on it on an ongoing basis, and I'll try to respond to those comments. Let me remind everyone just one more time that I am not an attorney. This is not legal advice. I'm a school administrator, and so I can speak to you from that perspective about how school discipline works. I can also talk to you about any other topic you want to discuss about education in schools, because I've served in a variety of roles, ranging from teacher to induction support provider, international baccalaureate coordinator, vice principal, school board member, and I've also been an educational consultant, and just happy to speak on anything education, especially K-12 education. I can stray into post-secondary, but of course my experience is not there. My experience is K-12. So thank you all for joining me today, and I will catch you next time. Much appreciated.